Zach with Wingard Wearables. You're one of 12 special people who's going to watch this video to the end. And today's video is about the biggest, most beautiful DickPick ever made, the DickPick MAGNUM. And we're going to cover why we made it, how it's made, what you can do with it, and where you can get it. Be edgy! So, why we made the DickPick MAGNUM? Well, we made the full-size DickPick. This has a percussive hammer face, a pry bar, and a spike, and lots of ways you can grip it in utility and combatives. And it was so nice, and it is so nice, but people came back, a few people, these are a very popular tool, but a few people asked us, hey, can you make the DickPick smaller, right? So we worked and came up with the micro DickPick, 4.5 inches, thinner, different steel. We have a video on both of these tools that you can check out in the link below. But while we were designing the micro DickPick, we had a thought, like what happens if we make not only a smaller size DickPick, but a bigger size DickPick, a grander size DickPick, a DickPick that can power through bigger prying, percussive impact, probing, piercing, bigger task. What would a DickPick look like if it was designed for a soldier, a first responder, or a civilian who just has bigger tasks than he can accomplish with a 6.5 inch long tool? And so that's why we went down the road that led us to DickPick MAGNUM. Now, a DickPick for a soldier. A soldier's equipment and weapons are almost entirely government supplied. They are chosen, procured, bought by the government. It's mill standard, and they don't really get a say in the matter. But military contracts for bayonets haven't occurred in a really long time. A soldier is more likely to put a sound suppressor on the muzzle of their rifle than a bayonet, right? And so in the modern day, in the American military, soldiers can make personal choices to procure their own blade or edged weapon. And, that could be the only weapon you bring with you into the combat zone that you personally selected. So it says something a little bit about you and what you're expecting to do. And so with the DickPick MAGNUM, we really wanted it to be not just in design, but in materials and in the testing we've done so far, rugged enough for the wide range of combat, zone requirements, that sort of thing. And you'll see what that means. It's very different from what we chose for the full-size and micro-size DickPicks, and especially their carry systems. There are some materials for military applications that, in civilian applications they're okay, but in military applications they're a no-go. So, how we made the DickPick MAGNUM. It all started with hand sketches, just so many sketches, and most of them were along the lines of our full-size DickPick, sort of scaled up in size and tapered differently, that sort of thing. And I have a friend I know who's in historic European martial arts. He knows dagger fighting, that sort of thing, and we'll get into it a little bit later in the video, but that type of combative capability is relevant in the DickPick MAGNUM's design. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, how big do you think this thing needs to be to, circumvent the armor, get to the vitals? And, here's a picture, check this out. And he pointed out that the square cross-section going all the way down would be better if it was partially twisted into a diamond cross-section, because in the biomechanics of the stab, that diamond orientation with more of an edge coming in this direction than square would be better at splitting through materials. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do a partial twist on this, which is feasible to do with water jet cutting this and then having it forged with a twist, well, I might as well do mini twists, because if I do mini twist, and this is a prototype, the first prototype DickPick MAGNUM we had, if we do multiple twists, that creates raised texture for you to grip, really good texture in a powerful downward stabbing motion. It winds up going from a square cross-section to a diamond cross-section, but it just does it with multiple twists so you get that grip. And it also happens to look a little bit like some of those historic dagger designs that had that spiral grip in the handle section. So it serves multiple purposes: aesthetic, textural, and it also, in addition to texture, serves to twist and turn from square cross section to diamond cross section. Now, as we refine the design in size, it started to get around the size of a K-bar knife. And we were hoping to keep it at least the same weight, maybe a little bit less, to reduce soldier burdens. Like K-bar knife, say what about it what you will, it still was a size and weight that millions of soldiers carried in the battlefield. So we thought, given some of the dimensions we received off of, the HEMA expert guy, and looking at, equipment like this that's been battle proven, these big fighting / utility knives, hey, let's get the DickPick MAGNUM nominally of the same size, and hopefully it'll be a little bit less in weight. So then the paper sketches became, cardboard cutouts, which weren't quite right, and then converted into refined dimension designs into a DXF file. There's a local water jet cutting company that we work with, and we procured 3/8 thick 1075 steel plate. We wanted a, consulting with our blacksmith, we wanted a really tough tool steel that could handle these tough tasks, and so we got it water jet cut. And it turned out to be the most expensive part to get water jet cut that we've ever done. When you look at, our micro DickPicks, it's 3/16 inch thick steel, but, the cutting parameter is what it is. Full-size DickPick, the cutting parameter gets bigger, and the material is thicker. And the more your cutting parameter is, and the thicker your material, your plate is that you're doing the water jet cutting out of, the more expensive the process is. So when you get to something the size of the DickPick MAGNUM, it winds up being about 12 times the material removed compared to our micro DickPicks. And it winds up being close to 3 times the material removed compared to our full-size DickPicks. So substantial cost. And also its shape, which is kind of L-shaped, is inherently inefficient for stacking into a plate to cut out many of these. So our yield in terms of parts per plate was low. So not only was the process to cut it out more expensive, it wasn't as efficient of a yield. So by the time we got the water jet cut blanks, it was already getting pricey. So then we took the water jet cut blanks of 1075 steel, worked with our blacksmith. He's a wonderful blacksmith who was able to forge and twist, getting about 6 twists and then a partial twist to go from square cross section to diamond cross section. Then you had freehand grinding on a belt grinder for this portion here, heat treating, and then more grinding and hand file work to break the corners here. So if this was, square cross section and diamond cross section, if those came to a hard edge, when you grip this very firmly, or whether you're doing hammer tasks, stabbing tasks, or hand drilling tasks, those sharp corners would be very abrasive to your skin. So those corners have been filed down to be smooth, so it's safe to grip with your hands, even with great force, except for the last about 1.5 to 2 inches. This is where the corners become hard edged, and that's so this can better pierce through layered materials or be used to bite into materials for hand drilling. So you want those sharp corners just at the tip, where it then sort of tapers up to the main cross section. So that is how the DickPick Magnums were made. After a heat treat, there was a final refinement of the dimensions and edges, a final grind, and then patina, and then rub down with an oil to protect 1075 from environmental corrosion. Now, just oiling 1075 isn't the perfect weatherproofing, but it does help a lot. And you will, when you get your DickPick Magnum, you will, as you use it, need to, occasionally touch it up with oil. Now, the Scabbard design. Our micro DickPicks and full-size DickPicks are a taco-style sheath of Kydex with these elastic shock cords and clamps. And you can, attach aftermarket carry systems if you want, but that's the carry systems they consist of. And they're excellent in the civilian context. But remember, for DickPick MAGNUM, we're talking about, hey, what would a soldier's DickPick be, right? So I reached out to a friend of mine that is in the soldier equipment realm. He's an expert. That's his day job, working on soldier equipment, evaluating it, that sort of thing. And I asked him, hey, this is what we're doing with our standard DickPicks. What happens if we were to, try to have something that could also serve in the military context, in the combat zone? And he said, well, you don't want to use Kydex, and you don't want to use elastic. And it's because of the temperature extremes. Now, Kydex is a wonderful material for the civilian context. It's great to work with. You can heat it up. It has a very wide range of temperatures that you can heat it up. It becomes malleable. You can work with it, put it in a press around the component that you want to thermoform around, and then it cools down. The problem is, at extreme cold temperatures, Kydex becomes brittle. I am not a chemist. My wife is a wonderful chemist, and she's described to me something called the glass transition temperature, and that's with, she's probably going to jump in and correct me, but a lot of polymers have a glass transition temperature where they start behaving in a mechanical fashion of load in a brittle failure fashion. So Kydex is not a brittle material until you start to approach negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it 100% cracks under a load. It just breaks, shatters. You can look it up. Now, you might be thinking, negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, that's crazy. I'm never going out there. Well, if you're a civilian, probably not. It's pretty rare for civilians to be walking around holding their gear out in negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's, again, why Kydex is wonderful in the civilian realm. Most of the time when you're carrying everyday carry items like, handgun holsters and knife sheaths, that sort of thing, they're close up to your body under layers of clothing. So even if it's negative 20 degrees outside, the Kydex is much warmer than that, and it's going to do okay. But when you're a soldier, your equipment may be mounted exposed to the elements. It may be on your rucksack. It may be put through Molly Pals loops on your plate carrier or your gun belt, and it may be exposed to even colder temperatures than that. There were battles in the Korean War that were below negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit. There were battles in Pakistan, India, border battles on glaciers that went under 60 degrees, minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So the military has to be able to fight in a huge temperature range of environments, and Kydex simply can't cut it. And that's why a lot of holsters and scabbards and that sort of thing for the military are textile based. So think layered nylon, that sort of thing. And so we had to learn a completely new set of materials and methods of manufacture to go from this carry system to this carry system, which is what the Scabbard is right now. And so it is a mil standard nylon tube, mil spec nylon, mil spec Velcro. We had to figure out how to, kind of like using an all-light tool, the micro DickPick, by the way, to spread the nylon and set brass eyelets so that you could attach aftermarket carry clips if you wanted to carry this, inside the waistband. But it's also got this Velcro retention strap, and it's slim enough to slide through Molly Pals loops. So that's what the Scabbard wound up being. But we went through several iterations. And originally we wanted the Scabbard to be sort of a working Scabbard. If you guys recall the Russian bayonet where the Scabbard is also wire cutters, I really tried hard with ideas where we had, a core. Originally it was Kydex till we learned better, with some nylon where you could grip this and try to swing it like a hammer. But all the prototypes we had where we had that working Scabbard concept, it just never wound up working to our satisfaction. The DickPick MAGNUM tool tended to wobble about too much. Kydex was a no-go. We wound up having to search for a different rigid polymer that could fit inside the nylon tube. And what we went with was a polyethylene tube. It's used in irrigation hose, that sort of thing. And polyethylene has a glass transition temperature well below any temperature that any military has fought at. I was even able to get I was able on an earlier prototype sheath to take that tube inside of the nylon, temperature condition it to negative 65 degrees, put it on a table, hit it with a mallet. It did not fracture. It had a little kink on it. The bend you see here isn't even from that. That was just how it came out of the hose, when you cut it. Now, I did figure out how to straighten the polyethylene. I'm telling you this because this was a learning curve we had to figure out. Polyethylene is not a thermoplastic. Its temperature range where it's workable and thermosettable is so narrow, it's impractical. It's not like Kydex where you got a big, wide band of temperatures where you can work with it. But when we cut these off of the irrigation hose, it was a big hoop of it. It had this unsightly bend. And when you shove the DickPick MAGNUM in it, that bend does go away due to the sheer stiffness of the DickPick MAGNUM. The tube extends beyond, though, the length of the tip, so you don't get stabbed by it. And you can see that bend kind of continue. So what we wound up figuring out was take those tubes, which were bent, and put a aluminum tube in the tube, put it in the oven at 200 degrees for about a half hour. And that elevated temperature was enough that when it had that warm metal rod inside it, that kind of reset it and straightened it. And that's how we were able to straighten the nylon tubes so that the scabbards stayed straight and weren't featuring this unsightly bend. Because, hey, you don't want a DickPick that's bent. That's just not good. It wouldn't bend the tool, but, the scabbard, it just, it doesn't look right like that. So we were able to figure out with that new material how to straighten it out. So it was a learning process. The nylon, because it was layered nylon, it exceeded the capabilities of my wife's sewing machine. Like, I'm not a sewer, but she was describing, the challenge of it. Like most sewing machines in a house are kind of like a Swiss Army knife. They're designed to handle a variety of tasks. But when you're talking about sewing through, layers of nylon, you need something bigger. And so we wound up having to invest in an industrial sewing machine, which we use to make these scabbards. That costs thousands of dollars. So, this DickPick MAGNUM project, seeing it through, lots of unforeseen expenses, but it was just each step got us in the right direction. We figured out how to make a scabbard that could handle extreme temperature conditions, and we figured out a tool that is very stout and can be used in a variety of ways for utility and combatives. So at the end of how it's made, it turned out to be more expensive to make the DickPick MAGNUM than our Empress and Stingray tomahawks. It wasn't more expensive to make than the back ripper, but it was quite expensive. And so, we're really struggling to keep the price of the DickPick MAGNUM and Scabbard and, U.S. shipping below $250. And we were able to do that. These are available on the site for $235. The reason we're able to go just a little bit lower is, even though this is more expensive to make, our tomahawks are an assembly. This is one piece of metal. It's complete. But tomahawks require hickory handles that have to be finished and lots of attention to detail to attach it to the metal head. So, it takes less time compared to a tomahawk to finish a DickPick MAGNUM. It just, costs more money. But anyways, yep, that's how they're made. Fantastic. And we're going to get into how you can use your DickPick MAGNUM. All right, so this was actually the first DickPick MAGNUM prototype. And that was very important because it could show how, when we were testing it, it can be used. The DickPick MAGNUM's hammer face, although it's very concentrated, there's enough mass and the corners of the edges are broken that you can hold this in your hands, and by pressing your fingers, your thumb going this way and your fingers enclosed, you can use this as a hammering or grubbing or prying tool. It actually works quite well. It's comfortable. Now, hammering nails, clearly a hammer is better at hammering nails, and there's no nail notch, so the DickPick Magnum isn't going to be the best tool for hammering nails, and certainly not for extracting them. But it can be used to percussively bash things. I've been bashing pallets and prying them apart. I have successfully pounded nails and used this in a grubbing tool application. If you take a two-handed grip like this here, where you've got a second hand further down to sort of balance it, you can do twisting, hand drilling motions through wood and drill a hole because of those hard corners there that bite into the wood. Of course, it can be used as an ice pick or, scribing type tool, although it is quite large compared to our, micro DickPick and DickPick Magnum. But, the tasks those tools can do, this can do, it's just much larger in size. So it can handle bigger leverage, bigger percussive impact, bigger prying motions. It is stouter, so on the pry bar edge, it does flare out some, so there are going to be some gaps that you won't be able to force it into. But it can be, especially if you use the hammer face here to sort of pound it in, you can pry things apart that it doesn't really easily go into initially. So think like batoning a piece of wood. You can percussively slam this pry bar edge into the wood, strike it here to hammer it in further, and pry apart some materials. And it can also be used in probing and piercing and trash pickup type tasks. But I've had someone ask me like, hey, this thing, have you tested it for breaching? We have not, and that's because I have no background in breaching. And I've talked to people that have done breaching of various, domestic or vehicle type applications, and there are just so many materials and variables that I'm not even sure quite where to start. Like you could have a domestic door. It looks like just a standard door in a house, and it could be the same door in two different houses, but the hardware that's used to attach to the house, or the tolerances and the gaps between the door, that sort of thing, can change what can work. Same with automobile glass and materials, that sort of thing. So it's not our background yet. It's something that we are interested to find out more. If you have ideas for how to test breaching with the DickPick Magnum, make sure you can comment on it below. Now, the DickPick Magnum in combatives. This is not a dagger. It is not, there's no cutting edge on it. You can't slash with this. You can't stab it into somebody and propagate a cut. It is a spike, a faceted spike. So it is a point-driven tool. Now, my grandfather, who served in World War II in the Navy, him and many fellow soldiers, he talked about the knife combatives they were taught, and they were issued knives similar to this. It was essentially a K-bar knife, but there are many modern knives that are of similar type, where you've got a big belly, single-edged knife. They often can call it a field knife for field craft type use, but you can stick it in somebody. And the style of knife fighting he was taught in World War II was a hammer grip, edge in, sort of heave-ho and upwards rip into an opponent. And that could be effective. And especially if you look at, the K-bar knife and similar knives, sort of many of the battles that they were like featured in and stories about them, that sort of thing. They were facing opponents that were wearing thin textiles in tropical environments. You look at, the Pacific Theater in World War II or in the Vietnam War, the opponents that they were facing were not wearing much body armor. So I did interview a couple of combat veterans that had to use these sort of single-edged field knives in combat against enemy combatants. Although, these incidents are rare, they do happen in modern warfare. And one was a veteran, and he was serving in Iraq. It was a room-clearing mission. He was first guy in the door and wound up getting in a tangle with an Iraqi wearing no body armor, just wearing a cotton shirt. And they were fighting over his weapon. and he drew a knife, single edge, wasn't a K-bar knife, but it was very similar. And when he attempted to stab the opponent in the chest to target his heart, the blade had a tough time getting through the ribs, and that's because the rib cage has intercostal spaces that vary in size but are angled and usually well below 1 inch in width. And the knife he was using was similar in width to this. It was about 1.25 inches wide. So there's, when you have a blade that wide, the orientation of the blade versus the intercostal spaces, the gaps in the ribs, it's very easy to see how in an extreme environment like that, your adrenaline's pumping, you're in close quarters combats, you're trying to stab somebody who's trying to kill you, you might not have good orientation on that blade to punch through the ribs. And so he wound up having to put a second hand. He had to let go of his rifle, his carbine, and put a second hand on it to ram it in. And it did work, but it was not ideal. It was very tough to do. Another veteran I interviewed had to use a similar style knife he described as a field knife against an opponent wearing no armor, but nylon webbing. He called it an H-vest. It was basically a harness vest to hold all his military equipment. And just layered nylon was enough resistance against a big-bellied, single-edged knife that it was extremely difficult in the stab to get through basically a couple of layers of nylon. And when you look at what soldiers are actually wearing today, the layered textile armor they are wearing, it makes the weapons like this a whole lot more difficult to be feasible in hand-to-hand combatives. And I'll go into that more. We got to go outside. We're going to cut to outside. See you there. All right, we've got modern body armor and the DickPick MAGNUM. Now, a modern soldier in a well-funded military, they're going to be wearing lots of layered textile-based armor. Now the armor I'm showing here on Bob. Bob is an extra large guy, and these are old, medium-sized armor that is just barely squeezing his head in, and we barely got this on his torso. So you're gonna have to use your imagination some, but it makes the point that you can't get the point of the DickPick MAGNUM or a single-edged like field knife through the armor. Like, it isn't just heavy layers of Kevlar, which is extremely difficult, impossible to cut through with a knife, extremely difficult even to stab through. You can barely get the point in there. But it's also ceramic plate inserts that you are never going to stab through, and layers of equipment on top of the soldier, like rifle magazines full of ammunition. Now, most soldiers, if they're not, fighting wearing a gas mask, that sort of thing, they're going to have an open face. That's the biggest gap you can target. And the gap can, with this length, with this tool, with the DickPick MAGNUM and its size, these gaps, this gap here, the gaps under the arm, of course, Bob's going to have, soldiers are going to have arms, but you can reach the vitals through those gaps. It just takes lots of length. That's why the DickPick MAGNUM is the size it's at, right? A stab through the face at different angles can reach the base of the brain, right? Whether it's a two-handed grip or a one-handed ice pick stab, you have that length to reach from different angles in the face to the base of the brain. Now, if you're talking going through the sides or, around the collar region, that's even more length required to reach the vitals here. And that's where having two-handed grips, going downwards, transitioning to one-handed grip to go deeper, that sort of thing, really long length, can actually buy you something in that scenario. But that's the point. With modern body armor, it completely changes the type of tool you're going to need and the techniques you need to overcome an opponent in close quarters combatives. I hope that makes sense. Be edgy. Now, I want to make it clear that, in modern warfare, no one is advocating edged weapons as a primary method. That's not your battle plan. That's for when things go horribly wrong. And in modern warfare, it does happen, although it's rare. A soldier can have an unexpected encounter and can't get their other weapons into play. Another situation that could happen is if it's not you, but it's someone ahead of you, say in a room clearing environment, who's suddenly in a life or death grappling situation. So the DickPick MAGNUM, because it has no cutting edges on it, it's just got a sharp point, you can put your hands on the majority of its length to use in different grips. So it doesn't have to be simply ice pick grip downward stab like a historic dagger. There were in fact a lot of historic European martial arts techniques where two hands were used to grip along the dagger, right? But with this big L shape here, you have a secondary grip you can take here and then have another hand along the length of the tool. So you got these battering ram type motions to power through an opponent's defense, and you can choose how far along the length of your DickPick Magnum that you grip. You can actually have about 7 inches of spike coming out of your fists when you're powering through. So it seems to provide a lot of options potentially for extreme close quarters combatives, but it's also got a lot of relations to those historic battle-proven dagger fighting techniques, which were really ironed out with a knight in armor facing another knight in armor. They had really tiny gaps they were working with in their body armor, and they were using eventually daggers that kind of evolved into spike-like cross sections. And so you could think of this, even though it's not a dagger, as having that capability in the thrust, yet providing all these utility capabilities. So when you put something on your kit in the scabbard, and it can be carried in a Molly Pals loop or on your gun belt or tucked in your pants in a civilian context or even off of your belt, that provides just a lot of options, both in combatives, in utility, and in methods of carry. All right, now the DickPick Magnum in its scabbard. It has a belt loop, so you can carry this outside the waistband. Velcro strap is down. That prevents the DickPick Magnum from twisting much inside when this is on the belt. It just can't twist completely around. If the Velcro is not engaged, if some strap you're carrying on you, like you're carrying a gym bag or something, were to catch this, there's nothing really within that polyethylene tube to keep it from spinning. That Velcro strap ensures it doesn't do that, right? So if you got it outside the waistband, definitely engage that Velcro strap. If you got it in your Molly Pals loops, either on a plate carrier or a gun belt or on your rucksack, definitely engage the Velcro strap for retention. If you choose to carry it inside the waistband, you got to fold that Velcro strap back and use the eyelets that come with it. It's going to have 2 brass eyelets in there to install an aftermarket carry system. So this is aftermarket carry clip, discrete carry concepts. I've had that installed. That does not come with your DickPick Magnum. You can choose whatever aftermarket clip you want that works for you. But I have successfully carried this inside the waistband in this orientation. So it's sort of on my left side. I slide this down the waistline. I clip into the waistband with this clip, and the Velcro strap is not engaged, but in that orientation pressed against my body, there's really not much that can scooch in here. Like if you have a strap or something, it's usually on one side of the body. It's not at your core. So there's really not much that can come in here and tilt this. And that tilt, that ability to swing it out, is actually pretty good for the quick draw. Because I found I could, when I draw it, I could reach down with my thumb, push this out a little bit with my thumb, and then transition to the grab like that. So it's sort of one clean motion where you, with the thumb, grab this, push this out, and then reach and grab it up. I hope that makes sense. I may have to reshoot that like with a close-up of my glorious waistline where I show this DickPick Magnum getting pulled out of my pants. What do you guys think? Comment below if you want to see that video. So, the DickPick Magnum. We've got them available only at wingardwearables.com. Some of them have been pre-sold. Some of them are on the site. Get yours today. It is 3/8 thick, 1075 steel, heat treated to about 56, 57 Rockwell C. Remember to keep yours periodically oiled, especially as you use it. That can, 1075 isn't rust proof, but it's a very tough steel. And this is just a big, beautiful, bold tool. It took us a lot of effort to bring this out to market, and we're just really proud of it. And you should be too. You should be very proud to get one of these and put it in your pants or put it on your kit. Be edgy.